Hi, welcome to Feed Your Soul. I am Melinda, and you are watching our series on the Torah portions. The series is designed with followers of Jesus in mind to help us know the front of our Bibles better than we do, to give us a foundation and a deeper understanding so we can understand those New Testament teachings better, deeper, and more in the context in which they were written. This week, we are in the book of Deuteronomy, the second portion there. This portion is called Vayechanan, which means, and I pleaded, or something close to that. It's in Deuteronomy, the end of Deuteronomy 3 through 7:11. It is actually a long portion, so we're going to try to keep this pace going. We're also going to look at Isaiah 40 and then some verses from Mark 12:18 through 34. And we are picking up here in the midst of a speech, this opening speech by Moses, giving us kind of a recap to this next generation of Israelites as they get ready to go into the land. The speech is interesting, as we noted last week. If you didn't see last week's portion, I would encourage you to go back and look at that one, the Devarim on words, because it's really the first half here that we discuss what is going on in this portion. There are some things left out of this recap speech, big things, and there were kind of interesting choices about what to focus in on. And I think it was all purposeful, and there's lots of meaning there. We actually get the recap of the 10 commandments in this portion. So there's a lot to get to, and there are significant differences, and then there are definitely some similarities to the other places in the Torah that this speech really kind of copies and reiterates for this next generation. So it's just interesting. I always recommend reading these parts of Deuteronomy along with the parts that kind of happened in real time in the other books. And so the version we're using for these next couple of weeks, which will point you to those addresses, and I'll show you what I mean along the way. So we are in Deuteronomy 3, and it's talking about a section that we first saw in Numbers 27, 12 through 17. So you can see that here. So I'm using the Berean Study Bible because it just does a nice job in pulling in those cross references for us so we don't have to figure it out for ourselves. All right. Chapter 3, verse 23. At that time, I also pleaded for grace with the Lord. That's really what that word means in the Hebrew. I did a Hebrew word study on the Vayechanan, and pleading for grace is really the connotation of this word, mercy, grace. So at that time, I pleaded for grace with the Lord. Oh, Lord God, and really that's Adonai or Adonai Yehovah. Whenever you see the capital letters, that's really the part of the word that is God's proper name. So here, because Adonai or Lord actually comes before Yehovah, it gets complicated. But in the Hebrew, oh Adonai Yehovah, you have begun to show your greatness and power to your servant. For what God in heaven or on earth can perform such works and mighty acts as yours? Please let me cross over and see the good land beyond the Jordan, that pleasant hill country as well as Lebanon. But Yehovah was angry with me on account of you, and he would not listen to me. That is enough, Yehovah said to me. Do not speak to me again about this matter. Go to the top of Pisgah, look to the west and the north and the south and the east. See the land with your own eyes, for you will not cross this Jordan. But commission Joshua, encourage him and strengthen him, for he will cross over ahead of the people and enable them to inherit the land that you will see. So we stayed in the valley opposite Beth Peor. So we went over this last week, some interesting ideas about the reasoning for why Moses didn't come into the land. And the kind of obvious reason was in the narration, in the story. Moses gets upset. He winds up hitting the rock instead of speaking to the rock to bring the water out of it, right? God is ultimately doing this miracle, right? Providing them water out of a rock. But Moses, in his anger, didn't follow the directions. And God winds up really calling him out for this. But after 40 years of hindsight, we are getting bits and pieces of a little bit more to the story. And we're hearing a little bit more from Moses where he thinks the responsibility is, what he thinks maybe contributed to him not going into the land. And when he says here, on account of you, Jehovah won't let me into the land on account of you, we hear a little bit more in-depth analysis on why Moses can't enter. And we talked about that last week. We talked about the parallel between how the story of the spies is really connected to Eden. There's this similar language about land and tree and fruit, and then the consequences of kind of banishment, exile, and then death. And so there's these purposeful connections there, but there's also some purposeful connections in this last week's section, and also right here touched on in this third chapter of Deuteronomy. So if you didn't look at last week's, I suggest you go look at that now. We're going to talk a little bit about a little more about this reason that Moses isn't entering, because it's a big deal. Moses dedicated this whole latter part of his life to leading these people, and then he doesn't get to go in. And we can speculate on why. Do any of us really know exactly the big spiritual meaning behind it? We know Joshua, whose name means Jehovah saves. Him being the one symbolically taking them into the land, into that promised land, seems really prophetic. Moses, meaning the one being pulled out of the water, led them through the Red Sea. Jehovah saves, Yehoshua is the one bringing them into the promised land. So there's propheticness all over the names, but a little deeper than that, what happened? And I saw this theory and I loved it. And I feel like it rings true somewhere. And sometimes maybe there's not one answer, right? But there's multiple layers. And in Deuteronomy 1, which isn't this portion, it's last portion, but since he mentions on account of you, I can't come into the land on account of you, I thought we just needed to talk about this for another minute. So in addition to the spies and kind of the decision on sending the spies out into the land, making that decision, which was what we talked about last time, Moses seems to be highlighting this. In the beginning part of chapter 1 of Deuteronomy, it really reflects and repeats kind of similar language in the second half of the first chapter of Deuteronomy. And something seems to be pointing to these two ideas. Why did Moses talk about Jethro and the judges, right? Like, of all the things that happened in the desert in the 40 years, right? Golden calves, God speaking from the mountain, stones written with the finger of God, manna. I mean, there were many things, that Korah's rebellion, even. There are many things that could have been talked about here. And Moses, in chapter 1 of Deuteronomy, giving this recap, talks about his father-in-law and deciding to appoint judges for the people so that Moses wasn't left on his own, taking care of everyone's matters. But the language that was used here is kind of parallel. He said, when he discussed this with Jethro, he said to Jethro, I cannot carry the burden for you and alone. I can't carry the burden for you, my people, these people alone. But then he talks about God carrying the people. So with Jethro, this is why they decided to do the judges, because Moses couldn't carry the burden alone. But with God taking them out of Egypt and walking them through the wilderness, he will carry the people like a father carries his son, like a man carries his son, right? So I'll read it real quick. This is 129. So I said to you, do not be terrified or afraid of them. Jehovah, your God, who goes before you, he will fight for you just as you saw him do for you in Egypt. and in the wilderness, where Jehovah your God carried you as a man carries his son all the way by which you traveled until you reached this place. So there just seems to be some regret, maybe. Maybe Moses felt like he abandoned the people by distancing himself from their needs. He put the people down because they were too great a burden for him. And now he wants the people to know you're not too great a burden for your God. He'll never put you down. I couldn't hold you up, but Yehovah will never let you down. And I just think it's a really cool connection here, and it's giving me goosebumps. It's just that Moses wasn't the one carrying them this whole time. It really was Yehovah. So to just make it really clear that this isn't the work of Moses getting them into the land, it is the work of Yehovah. And I think that's what Moses is coming to understand here. And he's kind of making it known in this speech. So let's jump back into chapter 4. And I just want to note there's a lot of purple I highlighted here, and it was just to talk about the commandments and just how often this concept comes up in this chapter. It's a lot. Keeping the commandments, teaching them, specific commandments, anytime that comes up about keeping the commandments and teaching them to your children, I highlighted them in purple just to see it. So, and this word comes up too a couple of times in this portion, the Shema. It means listen, hear, listen, but an active. We talked about this last week, this active form of this verb, listen and obey, listen and do, listen and act. Okay. So hear now, Shema, O Israel, the statutes and ordinances that I am teaching you to follow so that you may live and may enter and take possession of the land that Jehovah, your God, the God of your fathers, is giving you. You must not add to it or subtract from what I command you, so that you may keep the commandments of Jehovah, your God, that I am giving you. Not add to it or subtract, either one. Important. Your eyes have seen what Jehovah did at Baal Peor, for Jehovah, your God, destroyed from among you all who followed Baal of Peor. But you who held fast to Jehovah your God are alive to this day, every one of you. See, I have taught you the statutes and the ordinances, just as Jehovah my God has commanded me, so that you may follow them in the land that you are about to enter and possess. Observe them carefully, for this will show your wisdom and understanding in the sight of the peoples who will hear of all the statutes and say, surely this great nation is wise and an understanding people. For what nation is great enough to have a God as near to them as Jehovah our God is near to us whenever we call on him? And what nation is great enough to have righteous statutes and ordinances like this entire law I set before you today? Only be on your guard and diligently watch yourselves so that you do not forget the things your eyes have seen, and so they do not slip from your heart as long as you live. Teach them to your children and grandchildren. The day you stood before Jehovah your God at Horeb, that's Mount Sinai, Jehovah said to me, gather the people before me to hear my words so that they may learn to fear me all the days they live on the earth, and that they may teach them to their children. You came near and stood at the base of the mountain, a mountain blazing with fire to the heavens, with black clouds and deep darkness. And Jehovah spoke to you out of the fire. You heard the sound of the words, but saw no form. There was only a voice. He declared to you his covenant, which he commanded you to follow, the 10 commandments, or really the 10 words, the 10 utterings, the 10 sayings that he wrote on 2 tablets of stone. At that time, Jehovah commanded me to teach you the statutes and ordinances you are to follow in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess. So since you saw no form of any kind on the day Jehovah spoke to you out of the fire at Horeb, be careful that you do not act corruptly and make an idol for yourselves of any form or shape, whether in the likeness of a male or a female, of any beast that is on the earth, or bird that flies in the air, or of any creature that crawls in the ground, or fish that is in the waters below. When you look to the heavens and see the sun and moon and stars and all the host of heaven, do not be enticed to bow down and worship what Jehovah your God has apportioned to all the nations under heaven. That's highlighted because that's a direct commandment, right? Reminders about following the commandments here. Yet Jehovah has taken you and brought you out of the iron furnace of Egypt to be his people, a people of his inheritance, as you are today. Jehovah, however, was angry with me on account of you. Here he says it again. He swore that I would not cross the Jordan to enter the good land that Jehovah your God is giving you as an inheritance. For I will not be crossing the Jordan because I must die in this land, but you shall cross over and take possession of that good land. Be careful that you do not forget the covenant of Jehovah your God that he made with you. Do not make an idol for yourselves in the form of anything he has forbidden you. For Jehovah your God is a consuming fire and a jealous God. After you have children and grandchildren and you have been in the land a long time, if you then act corruptly and make an idol of any form, doing evil in the sight of Jehovah your God and provoking him to anger, I call heaven and earth as witnesses against you this day, that you will quickly perish from the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess. You will not live long upon it, but will be utterly destroyed. Then Jehovah will scatter you among the people, and only a few of you will survive among the nations to which Jehovah will drive you. And there you will serve man-made gods of wood and stone, which cannot see or hear or eat or smell. But if from there you will seek Jehovah your God, you will find him if you seek him with all your heart and all your soul. When you are in distress and all these things have happened to you, then in the latter days, or really could be read end of days, you will return to Jehovah your God and listen to his voice. For Jehovah your God is a merciful God. He will not abandon you or destroy you or forget the covenant with your fathers, which he swore to them by oath. Indeed, ask now from one end of the heavens to the other about the days that long preceded you, from the day that God created man on the earth. Has anything as great as this ever happened or been reported? Has a people ever heard the voice of God speaking in the fire as you have and lived? Or has God, any God, tried to take as his own possession out of another nation by trials, signs, wonders, and war, by a strong hand and an outstretched arm, and by great terrors, as Jehovah your God did for you in Egypt before your eyes? You were shown these things so that you would know Jehovah is God, and there is no other besides him. He let you hear his voice from heaven to discipline you. And on earth, he showed you his great fire, and you heard his words out of the fire, because he loved your fathers. He chose their descendants after them and brought you out of Egypt by his presence and great power to drive out before you nations greater and mightier than you, and to bring you into their land to give it to you for your inheritance, as it is this day. Know therefore this day and take to heart that Jehovah is God in heaven above and earth below. There is no other. If you see this theme that has come up a couple times in green, talking about heaven and earth as the witnesses here today. 40, keep his statutes and commandments, which I am giving you today, so that you and your children after you may prosper, and that you may live long in the land that Jehovah your God is giving you for all time. I think that's one of my favorite sections of all time, but we jump kind of subject matter here. Then Moses set aside 3 cities across the Jordan to the east, to which a manslayer could flee after killing his neighbor unintentionally, prior without malice, to save one's own life. He could flee to one of these cities: Bezar in the wilderness on the plateau belonging to the Reubenites, Ramoth in Gilead belonging to the Gadites, or Golan in Bashan belonging to the Manassites. This is the law that Moses set before the Israelites. These are the testimonies, statutes, and ordinances that Moses proclaimed to them after they had come out of Egypt, while they were in the valley across the Jordan, facing Beth Peor in the land of Sihon, king of the Amorites, who lived in Heshbon and was defeated by Moses and the Israelites after they had come out of Egypt. They took possession of the land belonging to Sihon and Og, king of Bashan, the two Amorite kings across the Jordan to the east, extending from Aroer on the rim of the Arnon Valley as far as Mount Sihon, that is Hermon, including all the Arabah on the east side of the Jordan, and as far as the Sea of Arabah, below the slopes of Pisgah. It's one of my favorite sections. Not necessarily that last part there, but the beauty and the richness in which Moses is reiterating the importance of the commandments and what they're to mean to these people, to this generation, and how he's calling heaven and earth as witnesses, right? Why? He's calling heaven and earth as witnesses, I believe, because they are eternal. Like they will last as long as this world does. So they will live to be the ones that are there to bear witness to this whole thing. And I believe that's why Yeshua mentions that nothing will fall away from the law, right? When he says, not one jot or tittle, depending on the version you read, not one speck of the law will pass away until heaven and earth pass away. I think that's what he was thinking of here. How many times do we see the commandments and their importance in being kept and then taught to children come up in that chapter? It was like over and over again, right? This is just a reminder to believers, anyone who calls himself a follower of Jesus, the commandments that came out of the word, the mouth of God, the words, Devarim, the Devarim that came out of the mouth of Yehovah are important. They are not some thing to be done away with because we don't need them anymore. They are not some burden placed on us that we couldn't bear. They are his instructions for living. They are an oath, a covenant, a sign that we are his people. We walk in his ways because we are his people. And I just think something got twisted in some denominations, in many denominations, that tells us these laws, these commandments aren't for us, when we just clearly saw how they bring life and blessing, and that they're there as a sign between us, between God and his people. I love it. I don't know. I just love how that chapter is written. Okay, Deuteronomy 5, verse 1. Then Moses summoned all Israel and said to them, hear, Shema again, O Israel, the statutes and ordinances that I declare in your hearing this day. Learn them and observe them carefully. Yehovah, our God, made a covenant with us at Horeb. He did not make this covenant with our fathers, but with all of us who are alive here today. Yehovah spoke with you face to face out of the fire on the mountain. He's connecting that generation with this generation. It wasn't just for them, it is for you today. It was as if he was speaking with you face to face. At that time, I was standing between Yehovah and you to declare to you the word of Yehovah, because you were afraid of the fire and would not go up the mountain. And he said, I am Yehovah, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourselves an idol in the form of anything in the heavens above, on the earth below, or in the waters beneath. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, Yehovah, your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on their children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing loving devotion, chesed, grace, mercy, to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of Jehovah your God in vain, for Jehovah will not leave anyone unpunished who takes his name in vain. Observe the Sabbath and day and keep it holy, as Jehovah your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Shabbat to Jehovah your God, on which you must not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your manservant or maidservant, nor your ox or your donkey, or any of your livestock, nor the foreigner within your gate, so that your manservant and maidservant may rest as you do. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and that Jehovah, your God, brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. This is why Jehovah, your God, has commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. Honor your father and mother, as Jehovah your God commanded you, so that your days may be long, and that it may go well with you in the land Jehovah your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear, this time it's not false witness, but it's empty or vain witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. You shall not covet your neighbor's house or field or manservant or maidservant or his ox or his donkey or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Jehovah spoke these commandments in a loud voice in your whole assembly, out of the fire, the cloud, and the deep darkness on the mountain. He added nothing more. And he wrote them on 2 tablets of stone and gave them to me. When you heard the voice out of the darkness, while the mountain was blazing with fire, all the heads of your tribes and your elders approached me. And you said, Behold, Jehovah, our God, has shown us his glory and greatness, and we have heard his voice out of the fire. Today we have seen that a man can live even if God speaks with him. But now, why should we die? For this great fire will consume us, and we will die if we hear the voice of Jehovah our God any longer. For who of all flesh has heard the voice of the living God speaking out of the fire as we have and survived? Go near and listen to all Jehovah our God says. Then you can tell us everything Jehovah our God tells you, and we will listen and obey. And Jehovah heard the words you spoke to me, and he said, I have heard the words that these people have spoken to you. They have done well in all they have spoken. If only they had such a heart to fear me and keep all my commandments always, so that it might be well with them and their children forever. Go and tell them, return to your tents. But you stand here with me that I may speak to you all the commandments and statutes and ordinances you are to teach them to follow in the land I am giving them to possess. So be careful to do as Jehovah your God commanded you. You are not to turn aside to the right or to the left. You must walk in all the ways that Jehovah your God has commanded you, so that you may live and prosper and prolong your days in the land that you will possess. I love Deuteronomy. Have I mentioned that already? I love the way, I just love the language. I love the recap. I love the things that get highlighted in these chapters. And I just love the promises that are reiterated and the blessings. And it just gives me goosebumps as I speak about it. The commandments are here, those 10 words, the 10 devarim, these statements that are really become a foundation of faith for not just the Jewish people, but for Christians too. These are a foundation of faith for all people who call Jehovah their God. And they're beautiful. And we've done some in-depth teachings on them. There's actually video on the 10 Commandments, and then there was an addendum to that, like a sequel, because we just couldn't fit everything into the one Torah portion video. So we're not going to go through each of those commandments and break them down like we did there, but go back and find those in Exodus when we did the Exodus portion. But I just want to touch on the reminder here that they were to do these things so that they may live. That at no point in time were these commandments looked at as a burden, as too much, as some yoke that no one could bear. They were not looked at as something they needed to be freed from in the future. At no point in time were these commandments seen to be something they were looking for a savior or a messiah to come save them from. Nope. They were just the instructions to live set apart lives, to treat others and to honor their God in a way that set them apart from all the other nations. So much so that the nations around them would marvel at the righteous rules, the righteous instructions that this people were living by. These instructions changed the world. I don't know if we talk about this enough, about how much the Judeo-Christian mindset, the foundation of both of our faiths, about how they changed history, changed it from this honor and shame culture, changed the world from this self-centered, vengeance-driven, honor and shame obsessed people to a people who were called to bend low and to serve their neighbor and to love one another. And the way you loved your God wasn't by vengeance killings or throwing virgins into volcanoes, but it was about loving people. It was about not murdering and not stealing, and not worshiping a pantheon of gods, but giving your devotion to the God of the universe. These were, we don't realize, being the modern people we are, especially in the West, we don't realize what the world was like, what these people were hearing some of these things in the context in which they lived, where slavery was normal, so normal, where taking people as plunder, normal. The world is harsh. And the way you got honor and power was by pushing other people down. And these laws, this foundation of this faith, these instructions for the kingdom of God came to level that playing field, really did. It's really important to keep the word of God in context, in the context in which these things were given, because it adds such a deep layer of meaning. When we hear these laws, these rules, do not murder, do not steal, do not lie, do not want what your neighbor has to the degree that you don't want, what you were given, right? Like there is a major commandment here. One of the 10 is don't be dissatisfied with what you have. These laws are just, we take them for granted at this point in modern history. We just do, because so many of our even national laws are based on this foundation. Do not lie, do not steal, do not murder, honor your father and mother. They're just beautiful. And I will bring it up again because every time we come across keeping the Sabbath verses or passages, I have to talk about it. This one talked about observe the Sabbath. Originally, when the 10 Commandments were spoken, it said, remember the Sabbath. I want to just submit to you that they're the same thing. You can't just remember something without doing something about it. Oh, I remembered your birthday, but I didn't say anything to you. I didn't speak it. I didn't get you a present. I didn't even wish you a happy birthday, but I remembered. No, you didn't. If you keep something inside, remembering it in that way isn't really significant. So remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Observe the Sabbath and keep it holy. They really mean the same thing. And that commandment is one of these very important 10 sets of words that was spoken to all of the people by the mouth of Jehovah. And I just want to put it in your mind, if it's the first time you've thought about this or the first time you've heard it, the Sabbath is important. Setting aside the seventh day to honor what Jehovah did in creation, to honor what he did in bringing his people out of the land of slavery, to remember who our God is, to remember that when we go out of our way to set that seventh day apart as holy, we are offering that up as a sign of who our God is. I think it's a big leap to say we can do away with that or spiritualize it or say it's another day when it was clearly setting apart the seventh day as God did when he rested that creates this sign between him and his people. Think about it. What do you think about the seventh day Sabbath? Is it something you've thought about? Has your church or your denomination taught that the Sabbath is done away with, or that the Sabbath is a different day, or that it's observed on Sundays? Let me know in the comments. What have you learned about the Sabbath, the seventh day, or any of these other commandments? Let's talk about it. Let's get a discussion going. Deuteronomy 6. These are the commandments and statutes and ordinances that Jehovah your God has instructed me to teach you to follow in the land that you are about to enter and possess, so that you and your children and grandchildren may fear Jehovah your God all the days of your lives by keeping all of his statutes and commandments that I give you, and so that your days may be prolonged. Hear, O Israel, and be careful to observe them, so that you may prosper and multiply greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as Jehovah, the God of your fathers, has promised you. Now, here's the famous Shema, right? We've heard this action word all throughout this portion so far, but here's like the famous Shema that is really the crux, the foundational maybe sentence of this faith in Jehovah. Shema, hear, O Israel, Jehovah is our God, Jehovah is one. And you shall love Jehovah your God with all of your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. So I wanted to grab this little charm that I had made years ago. It's in Hebrew. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but it's in Hebrew, and it is the Shema. And it says, Shema Israel, Yehovah Eloheinu, Yehovah Echad. And then the heart is there to kind of symbolize the love of the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength. And I love wearing it, and it's kind of silly I didn't wear it today. It does make me feel a little bit closer and connected with the word when I have this on. And I love that it is here in this chapter, in my favorite book of the Bible, probably Deuteronomy is, spoken by Moses, but also quoted by Yeshua, Jesus, when he's asked about the greatest commandment. And I just love it. Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. That's if you say it, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. But I've tried to train myself away from that traditional uttering of it to use his name. Shema Israel, Yehovah Eloheinu, Yehovah Echad. And I don't know the rest in Hebrew off the top of my head. But okay, I love it. It just makes me happy. And I need to put this back on my necklace. Okay. These words I am commanding you today are to be upon your hearts. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and speak of them when you sit at home, and when you walk along the road, and when you lie down, and when you get up. Tie them as reminders on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. And when Jehovah your God brings you into the land he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that he would give you, a land with great and splendid cities that you did not build, with houses full of every good thing, with which you did not fill them, with wells you did not dig, and with vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. And when you eat and are satisfied, be careful not to forget Jehovah, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Fear Jehovah your God and serve him only, and take your oaths in his name. Do not follow other gods, the gods of the peoples around you. For Jehovah your God, who is among you, is a jealous God. Otherwise, the anger of Jehovah your God will be kindled against you, and he will wipe you off the face of the earth. Do not test Jehovah your God as you had tested him at Massah. You are to diligently keep the commandments of Jehovah your God and the testimonies and statutes he has given you, Do what is right and good in the sight of Jehovah, so that it may be well with you, and that you may enter and possess the good land that Jehovah your God swore to give your fathers, driving out all your enemies before you, as Jehovah has said. In the future, when your son asks, what is the meaning of the decrees and statutes and ordinances that Jehovah, our God, has commanded you? Then you are to tell him, we were slaves of Pharaoh in Egypt, but Jehovah brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. Before our eyes, Jehovah inflicted great and devastating signs and wonders on Egypt, on Pharaoh and all his household. But he brought us out from there to lead us in and give us the land that he swore to our fathers. And Jehovah commanded us to observe all of these statutes and to fear Jehovah our God, that we may always be prosperous and preserved, as we are this day. And if we are careful to observe every one of these commandments before Jehovah our God, as he has commanded us, then that will be our righteousness. I keep saying it. It's my favorite section. All the sections in Deuteronomy, I think, are my favorite. Teaching your children as we wake up and go to sleep, as we walk down the road, those were really important commandments that I tried to live by, that we tried to live by in my home. I homeschooled my kids partially because of this, because I wanted to be able to walk out that commandment of being able to teach my children all day about his ways, about creation, about his love for them, about what is right in his eyes, in Jehovah's eyes. And not that we had our Bibles open all day reading out from it, but that it was woven into the fabric of our lives, because I took it very seriously. And I still do, even though they're young adults. Something neat in this section about the Shema is in the scrolls, in the transcripts that we have, there are two letters in this Shema Israel, Yehovah Eloheinu, Yehovah Echad. In this sentence, there are two letters that are big. And it's like they're there to remind us and make sure we know what these words mean. And it actually, for anybody in healthcare out there, it reminded me of the words that you see like on the med card X, like when medications, as we got more and more computerized, when medications were similarly spelled to other ones, they would use these like tall letters to make sure you saw the difference between the two medications. And this is what this reminds me of, like it's those tall letters, because it was really important that this sentence was never misunderstood. And the changing of these two letters could actually change the meaning of this sentence. So if the word Shema would be read with an aleph instead of the ayin, which they make a similar sound, which is really no sound. They take the sound of their vowel. The word would change from here to maybe, changing a firm declaration of belief into an expression of doubt. So maybe, possibly Israel instead of hear and do. And then similarly, the dalet there at the end of the sentence of the word ichad would be mistaken for a resh, which is a similar word, the R sound. Those two look almost identical. Then ichad would be, instead of one, would be read as achar, which is other. So this would make our belief in God, in one God, look like the belief in two. So these two words at either side of the sentence could be easily changed into other words if they were ever mistranslated or mistranscribed, I guess the word would be. And I just found that fascinating. I do love Hebrew. I wish I knew it better than I do, but lifelong learning, right? We can still try to learn more of the Hebrew language. Okay. Deuteronomy 7. When Jehovah your God brings you into the land that you are entering to possess, and he drives out before you many nations, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Pezerites, Hivites, and Jebusites, 7 nations larger and stronger than you. And when Jehovah your God has delivered them over to you to defeat them, then you must devote them to complete destruction. Make no treaty with them and show no mercy. Do not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons, because they will turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods. Then the anger of Jehovah will burn against you. I think that's really important, right? This feels, we don't like it. We don't like this whole moving these people out, devoting them to destruction. Do not intermarry with them. But he tells us why. Because they will turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods. Then the anger of Jehovah will burn against you, and he will swiftly destroy you. Instead, this is what you are to do to them: tear down their altars, smash their sacred pillars, cut down their Asherah poles, and burn their idols in the fire. For you are a people holy to Jehovah your God. Jehovah your God has chosen you to be a people for his prized possession out of all the peoples on the face of the earth. Jehovah did not set his affection on you and choose you because you were more numerous than the other peoples, for you were the fewest of all peoples. But because Jehovah loved you and kept the oath he swore to your fathers, he brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you from the house of slavery, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Know therefore that Jehovah your God is God, the faithful God who keeps his covenant of a loving devotion for 1,000 generations of those who love him and keep his commandments. But those who hate him, he repays to their faces with destruction. He will not hesitate to repay to his face the one who hates him. So keep the commandments and statutes and ordinances that I am giving you to follow this day. There's just been this whole theme with hearts. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, right? Soul and strength. There's some really important reasons why God gave us the commandments that he did. Ones that we may never understand this side of eternity, but ones that are pretty evident, right? Like we get them today. We get them with a different perspective than people maybe got them in the past. Well, why shouldn't I steal? If I'm stronger than you are, why shouldn't I take what you have? And there's some commentary that steal is a kidnap, that it meant do not steal people. Why can't I just take this person? I'm stronger. I have more. I need a servant or whatever. I want that. I'm going to take it. That was just life. Now we, even if it happens during war, we want to call out war crimes, right? War crimes wasn't a thing in the ancient Near East. There was no community standard of what was allowed. God came to turn it all on its head, that he was the one who gave life, and he was the one who set what was right and wrong. It was his decision, just like it was back in the garden. And here's that connection, right? Like we talked about last week. What was the sin in the garden? We got some insight through Moses's retelling of this story of the spies, that the sin in the garden had to do with making the decision to decide what is right and wrong. That the knowledge of good and evil really was about the decision to decide for ourselves what is right and wrong. And that doesn't mean to make a decision in the moment. It doesn't tell us exactly what to do in the Bible. And so we have to make a judgment call in different situations, but it's to decide, is what God is laid out for us, is that right and true and good? Or are we going to decide something else is right and true and good? He is the creator. He is our creator, and he gets to decide what is right, what is good, what is true. So even if we don't understand some of the laws and the ordinances and the statutes, it doesn't make them not good. And so the debate remains really in modern day Christianity of how much of this Torah, how much of these laws and ordinances and statutes are meant for us to follow. And I will submit to you as many of them as we are able to today. There's many we can't, right? We're not priests in the temple. No temple exists. We are not living in a theocracy, right? We don't have high priests over us to make some of these judgments. So a lot of these laws we can't follow, but there are many that we can. And what I think is more important than even following every law to the letter, because we're gonna fall short, from misunderstanding, lack of knowledge, sheer willpower. Built into those ordinances are ways to come before the Father and repent and ask forgiveness, to go to our high priest, right? So that's all built in there. Nobody's looking for you to be perfect in your keeping of it, but what is in the heart? Do you love Jehovah's ways? Do you love his commandments because they are a peek into his heart? Do you love his laws and statutes and ordinances because you know that they are for our good and that they make him happy? That's what I think is important. Like, writing this law in our heart isn't so that we never stumble, although I believe that's what that law is talking about, or that what those verses is talking about, the prophetic writing the law in our hearts as we get our renewed resurrected bodies in the future, when we will live out our salvation in the kingdom come, the New Jerusalem. But so much of what this already but not yet, this proleptic prophecy, the already part is that we can love these commandments because they're a way to walk out our love for Jehovah. And I do just want to touch on, for those of you who are new here, sometimes when we hear these verses about Canaan and talking about this people group and talking about, driving them out of the land and all of that, there is some really interesting insight in the book of Jubilees, an extra biblical book that talks about this land being kind of stolen by Ham's son, Canaan, way back in Noah's time, that the sons were given land by lot, by drawing straws or whatever. And Shem is who was supposed to get this space, and Canaan stole it. And so what God is doing here is really giving back that what was rightfully Shem's all of that time ago, long ago, restoring Shem's line to this space. And Canaan went there and really corrupted it with idol worship and not following Jehovah. And Ham warned him in this narrative in Jubilees, and it's really interesting. So if you're not familiar with the book of Jubilees, I don't have the chapter and verse. It's near the beginning because it's Noah, of what chapter that falls in Jubilees, but it's super interesting and you should read it. The insight is good, no matter when you believe that book was written. Okay, our prophet pairing here. We are in Isaiah actually for almost the rest of the portions, and they're kind of purposefully chosen. It's these comfort portions of the book of Isaiah, chosen because it's a hard time historically in Jewish history, in these weeks between like the anniversary of the destruction of the temple and through Rosh Hashanah, which Yom Teruah, the fall feasts, which are coming up. Depending on what actual calendar you follow, they're actually either coming up really, really soon or in a few weeks. Okay, Isaiah 40. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her forced labor has been complete. Her iniquity has been pardoned, for she has received from the hand of Jehovah double for all her sins. A voice of one calling, prepare the way for Jehovah in the wilderness. Make straight highway for our God in the desert. Every valley shall be lifted up, and every mountain and hill made low. The uneven ground will become smooth, and the rugged land a plain. And the glory of Jehovah will be revealed, and all humanity together will see it. For the mouth of Jehovah has spoken. A voice says, cry out. And I asked, what should I cry out? All flesh is like grass, and all its glory like flowers of the field. The grass withers, the flowers fall. When the breath of Jehovah blows on them, indeed, the people are grass. The grass withers and the flowers fall, but the word of our God stands forever. Go up on a high mountain, O Zion, herald of good news. Raise your voice loudly, O Jerusalem, herald of good news. Lift up, do not be afraid. Say to the cities of Judah, here is your God. Behold, the Lord God comes with might, and his arm establishes his rule. His reward is with him, and his recompense accompanies him. He tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arm. He carries them close to his heart. He gently leads the nursing ewes. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, or marked off the heavens with the span of his hand? Who has held the dust of the earth in a basket, or weighed the mountains on a scale and the hills with a balance? Who has directed the spirit of Jehovah, or informed him as counselor? Whom did he consult to enlighten him? And who taught him the path of justice? Who imparted knowledge to him and showed him the way of understanding? Surely the nations are like a drop in a bucket. They are considered a speck of dust on the scales. He lifts up the islands like a fine dust. Lebanon is not sufficient for fuel, nor its animals enough for a burnt offering. All the nations are as nothing before him. He regards them as nothingness and emptiness. To whom will you liken God? To what image will you compare him? To an idol that a craftsman casts and a metal worker overlays with gold and fits with silver chains? To one bereft of an offering, who chooses wood that will not rot? Who seeks a skilled craftsman to set up an idol that will not topple? Do you not know? Have you not heard? Has it not been declared to you from the beginning? Have you not understood since the foundation of the earth? He sits enthroned above the circle of the earth. Its dwellers are like grasshoppers. He stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them out like a tent to dwell in. He brings the princes to nothing and makes the rulers of the earth meaningless. No sooner are they planted, no sooner are they sown, no sooner have their stems taken root in the ground, then he blows on them and they wither, and a whirlwind sweeps them away like stubble. To whom will you liken me, or who is my equal? Asked the Holy One. Lift your eyes on high. Who has created all these? He leads forth the starry host by number. He calls each one by name. Because of his great power and his mighty strength, not one of them is missing. Why do you say, O Jacob, and why do you assert, O Israel, my way is hidden from Jehovah, and my claim is ignored by my God? Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord, Jehovah, is an everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary. His understanding is beyond searching out. He gives power to the faint and increases the strength of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who wait upon Jehovah will renew their strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and will not faint. My kids and I did this for this second half of Isaiah 40 as memory work. And so like the memories of learning that with them and memorizing that with them just all came back. Such a great chapter, such a beautiful chapter in the book of Isaiah. And it's one of really the first one of these comfort, I think there's seven sections of the Haftarah, which that's just the prophet pairings that go with the Torah portions. And it leads off with this verse: comfort, comfort my people, says your God. That Isaiah wasn't just there to call out Israel, the house of Israel and the house of Judah, and warn them, but also to offer comfort as to what will happen, what the prophetic, beautiful promise of living eternally with our Creator will look like. And so over these next few portions, we will go over these comfort portions. They were really meant to comfort the people of Israel, the Jewish people, through really hard times in their history. So beautiful passages, and we'll keep going over them in these coming weeks. Okay, we just have the short section from Mark 12:18. Then the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to Jesus, or Yeshua, and questioned him. Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies and leaves a wife but no children, the man is to marry his brother's widow and raise up offspring for him. Now, there were 7 brothers, and the first one married and died, leaving no children. Then the second one married the widow, but also died and left no children. And the third did likewise. In this way, none of the 7 left any children. Last of all, the woman died. In the resurrection, then, whose wife will she be? For all 7 were married to her. Jesus said to them, "Aren't you mistaken because you do not know the scriptures or the power of God? When the dead rise, they will neither marry nor be given in marriage. Instead, they will be like the angels in heaven. But concerning the dead rising, have you not read about the burning bush in the book of Moses, how God told him, I, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, he is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. You are badly mistaken." So that's the context for what this question is asked, right? Now, one of the scribes had come up and heard their debate. Noticing how well Yeshua had answered them, he asked him, which commandment is most important of all? Yeshua replied, this is the most important. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And how do you think he said that? I don't know. Do you think he said it in Aramaic? Or did he say, Shema Yisrael, Yehovah Eloheinu, Yehovah Echad? I think probably he said it in Hebrew. Okay. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. No other commandment is greater than these. Right, teacher, the scribe replied, you have stated correctly that God is one and there is no other but him, and to love him with all your heart and with all your other understanding and with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself, which is more important than all burnt offerings and sacrifices. When Yeshua saw that the man had answered wisely, he said, you are not far from the kingdom of God. And no one dared to question him further. We touched on this before about this greatest commandment. And I wish I knew exactly what portion it was in, but I'll tell the story again. A rabbi, one of the famous rabbis, and I can't remember which one, tells this story of someone coming up to him and saying, tell me, the summary of all of the commandments while I stand on one foot. Can you do that? Right? Like, can you sum it up quickly? And one rabbi turned him away. Another one was like, yes, I can do it. And he basically quoted this: love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And then went on to say, the rest of this is commentary. The rest of the Torah just tells you how to do that. And Jesus does really reiterate that, not here in this portion, that these are the most important commandments, but then he also says all the laws and prophets hang on these commandments in another passage. They hang on it. That doesn't mean like they're not necessary. The rest of the law and the prophets are commentary, are fill in the questions on how do we love the Lord our God? How do we love Yehovah, our Elohim? And how do we love our neighbors as ourselves? That's what the Bible's for, to teach us what love looks like. And again, we can take it for granted. Being in the West, 21st century Christians, sometimes we can take the necessity of and the beauty of these laws for granted, because our judicial system in many ways is based on these laws. But imagine living in a world where the laws of the land weren't: do not murder and do not steal. But it was the stronger gets to take whatever they want, do whatever they want. At least we say, sometimes it's not always lived out this way, especially with corrupt governments, and that exists everywhere. But we at least say that we believe in the fairness that has been really showed to us in the Word of God. And it's not just these 10 commandments. I highly, highly suggest, if you haven't been doing this Torah study with us, that you go through these books, because the books like Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers, they give us some laws that are so specific and so in the like show the heart of the Father, love for the marginalized, love for his animals, love for his creation, and people who were especially vulnerable at the time. So it's not just a list of do's and don'ts, but it's a peek into the Father's heart. That's what I believe these first 5 books of the Bible are. They teach us who God is. We have the Holy Spirit to help edify us, of course, and we have the teachings in the New Testament, but don't disregard this Torah, this first 5 books of the Bible, as for another people in another time, because it is our peek directly into the heart of God. So thank you for being here with me this week. I'm in the midst of getting caught up because I had a big event that I had to kind of take off recording for. I renewed my vows with my husband after 25 years. It's a pretty significant day for us. So we did that this past weekend and I got all off track. So I do owe you all a couple of videos. They'll be coming up. So thank you for being here. Shabbat Shalom if you are watching this on Sabbath. Otherwise, I will see you next time. Thank you for being here.